Compact cameras are making a comeback, and what an exciting time it is to see Canon seemingly respond to Sony's ZV lineup. Point-and-shoot cameras make a lot of sense for most things, and today we're going to compare the Canon PowerShot V1 versus the Sony ZV-1. Please let me know what other cameras you would like for me to verse against the Canon PowerShot V1 in the comment section. Right off the bat, look at this blind test so you can have an unbiased look to see which one of these two colors you like better. And while you look at those shots, I'll tell you about both cameras and what they have in common. Both cameras have fixed lenses, which means the lenses are attached and cannot be taken off, and they can both shoot in 4K resolution. They both have internal ND filters and both have optical image stabilization and digital stabilization. Both have face tracking along with advanced subject tracking, which is great for walk and talk handheld shots, and they both have flip out screens which fully articulate. They both have mic inputs and multi-face hot shoes on the top. They can both connect to smartphones to transfer files wirelessly, and you can download their apps for remote control. They both do not have electronic viewfinders, which may be a deal breaker for my older crowd. They both have a front-facing tally light when you're pressing record for video, and they are very compact and great for travel. They both have full manual exposure controls, and neither camera is weather resistant. Now, here is the results of those shots. Let me know if you knew which shot was which and how you knew. I thought it would be fun to throw both of these cameras up into my studio headshot setup. This way you can not only compare them to each other, but also to the A camera, which I use for all of these talking headshots, which is a full-frame Sony a7S III, and I have a Zeiss 35mm f1.4 lens attached to it. Skin tones on the PowerShot V1 look excellent in my opinion. I may see a little bit of facial distortion, but that's only due to the focal length that I was using. I had to set it back all the way to 17mm. I wanted to zoom in further, but the further I zoomed in, the more aperture I lost, and I was trying to keep my aperture as fast as possible, which is f2.8 on the PowerShot V1. The Sony ZV-1 did pretty well. Also, I could see a little bit of shift when it came to my skin tones. There's a little bit more saturation, but with that being said, I did get more background blur with the Sony ZV-1 because its base aperture is f1.8. I also wanted to test out macro shooting when it came to doing video, because when you do macro shots, you can really get an intricate detail analysis on which one of these two cameras has better detail and has more realistic looking colors. The minimum focus distance we get with the PowerShot V1 is 5.9 inches, and I was pretty amazed with how good this shot came out, looking at not only its detail, but also its colors as well. I'm not sure what the minimum focus distance is on the Sony ZV-1, but I was able to get in as close as I was with the Canon PowerShot V1, and it also has product showcase mode, which helps for beginners, but overall, I was very satisfied with this shot as well. By the way, this video is not sponsored by Canon or by Sony. I've owned the Sony ZV-1 for almost 5 years, and I rented the PowerShot V1 to see if I should upgrade from the Sony ZV-1. But if you'd like to support the channel, you can always take one of my courses or join the Film Alliance by subscribing. I fully zoomed up with both lenses, which is 52mm full frame equivalent on the PowerShot V1 and 70mm with the Sony ZV-1, because I wanted to see how much of a background blur I would get with both of these cameras. I found that the PowerShot V1 gave me a little bit less background blur because when we're fully zoomed in, the aperture jumps up to f4.5. And the higher your aperture, the less of a blurry background you're gonna get. The Sony ZV-1, on the other hand, has a maximum aperture of f2.8 when I'm fully zoomed in. And so I was able to get a little bit more of a background blur, which is what I prefer and like the look of. The same thing with this product shot, where I had to zoom in a little bit to make sure my frame was floating above the tabletop. And I see a little bit more blur with the Sony ZV-1 in the background than I do with the PowerShot V1. But with that being said, it's not that big of a difference, and I like the colors out of the PowerShot V1 in this studio lighting shot better because it looks more realistic to me than the ZV-1. The ZV-1 does have a little bit of a magenta look, and I noticed this to be the case whenever I came into the studio and I set my white balance to auto. If you've already watched some PowerShot V1 videos or you own the Sony ZV-1, then this was the comparison shot that gave it away because both cameras have different zoom speeds and variations. I'm not sure if the PowerShot V1 has a setting that can adjust the speed of the zoom, but it does zoom in a lot smoother and less jerky than the ZV-1. Not only does the ZV-1 have more of a jerky zoom to it, I feel like it has a little bit of jitter that's going on between the different zooming stages. Not sure exactly why that is. But before we get any further through this video, let's talk about the pricing. As of the time of recording this video, the Canon PowerShot V1 costs $899 US, and the Sony ZV-1 costs $748 US. So while some people may think that these are budget cameras, if you picked up the Sony ZV-1F for about $500 US, you'd be able to do a lot of what both of these cameras can do at a much cheaper price. And don't forget, you're also gonna need some additional accessories like SD cards, and I would also recommend picking up a couple extra batteries, especially for the ZV-1, because while I was out using both of these cameras, I ran out of 2 ZV-1 batteries for every 1 battery I ran out of with the PowerShot V1. Now, some of the shots that you've been looking at and others that I got with both of these cameras, I made available for free for you to download and then play with them in your editors so that you can see what this footage looks like without YouTube's compression. I'll leave a link to those project files in the description. And if you like videos like this one, make sure to like this video so I know to make more videos like this one. Let's talk about stabilization. Both cameras do have digital stabilization, but I would have really liked to see the Canon PowerShot V1 with IBIS or in-body image stabilization, which would have stabilized the sensor. Surprisingly, when I had enhanced stabilization on with the PowerShot V1 and I was walking at a steady pace holding the camera with both of my hands, I wasn't too impressed. The Sony ZV-1 seemed to do a little bit better, at least when it came to stabilization for this type of walking shot, but again, it's not the best in the world. So I would recommend picking up a gimbal for either of these cameras if this is the type of shot that you're going for. But if you're doing a vlog type of setup like this, where I can pull the Canon focal length all the way back to its 17 millimeters, the PowerShot seems to have better stabilization, which makes it more of a vlogging type of camera. The PowerShot V1 does have a larger sensor coming in at 1.4 inches than the smaller sensor that we get with the ZV-1, which is a 1-inch sensor, and this should help the PowerShot V1 power up, especially in low light conditions. But I'm not so sure that the PowerShot V1 did that much better when it came to skin tones, but this may be due to the fact that Sony denoises the shot, especially when you're in low light environments, when you're shooting in the standard color profile, which I was shooting with in this particular shot with both of these cameras. However, in this shot where I'm inside using natural light from a window, the Canon looks like it has more details on the contours of my face. It seems to have a little bit more saturation in its skin tones as well, and I think I like the skin tones from the PowerShot a little bit better. I've heard it asked if the ND filters are too weak to use in bright sunlight, and I would say not necessarily. I overexposed both of these cameras by 1 full stop, and then I applied the ND filter, and you can see that the PowerShot V1 seems to have a little bit more of a handle on the exposure once I applied the ND filter. So the fact that both of these cameras have built-in ND filters is a plus, but I would give it to the PowerShot V1 being a little bit stronger than the ZV-1. The Canon PowerShot V1 has a way wider lens, which we talked about in the beginning of the video, which is great for vlogging shots and getting real estate shots, but you will be getting a little bit more distortion on the outsides of your frames. But the ZV-1 can zoom further, which means you'll be able to get closer up to your subject. I think both cameras did a great job when it came to doing this green screen shot of this product. I didn't have any issues when it came to keying out the green in the background, but I did notice that the PowerShot V1 has sort of a magenta look on the shadows, and it's because of that reason I like the look of the green screen from the ZV-1 better. That's why for a lot of these shots, if you plan on doing in-studio type of shots, I would highly recommend you shoot in Canon's C-Log3 because it's a 10-bit codec and it's really going to pull through when it comes to color grading. By looking at the colors between both of these shots where I shot in C-Log3 and S-Log3, with the ZV-1, you can see that the ZV-1 is an 8-bit camera. I can't really pull that much color, especially in this lighting situation. And I found that to be the case with all of these golden hour type of shots. Even though I was overexposing my ZV-1 and I was exposing the PowerShot V1 right on the money, I still found the ZV-1 was pretty tough to color grade and the PowerShot was a lot easier. If you don't expose the PowerShot V1 properly, or if you underexpose it a little bit, you're gonna have a really tough time bringing back the shadows like you can see in this shot. Whereas with the ZV-1, I'm able to bring up the midtones a little bit more, but the trade-off is gonna be the noisiness. In this backlighting shot, I like how the Canon was able to hold on to a little bit more color in the leaves that are in the foreground, whereas the ZV-1 almost silhouettes the leaves out. The color of the sun in the Canon is a little bit more saturated in yellow compared to the pale white sun that we get with the ZV-1. I like the ZV-1's sun color better because I like the closer to white look that you get with the sun over that yellow look. But I do like the sky color out of the PowerShot V1 better than the sky color I get with the Sony ZV-1. The sky colors are pretty different in these two shots, and this one is subjective and it really depends on what your preference is. When I did this sharpness test, I wasn't really sure which one would be sharper, even though the PowerShot V1 houses a larger 22 megapixel sensor than the ZV-1's 20 megapixel sensor, but it does make a big difference. Because if you scale in 5000%, you can see when I cropped back and forth like this, the PowerShot V1 did much better than the ZV-1, but then again, who's ever gonna scale into 5000%? Like this. As long as you're not zooming in 5000%, both cameras did very well. Although like I mentioned, the V1 does house a larger 1.4 inch 22 megapixel sensor, so it's gonna offer sharper images. It's gonna have better dynamic range and more depth for people who want better photo quality as much as they like video. The ZV-1, on the other hand, was created as a video first camera, but it's only got a 20 megapixel sensor. It's still gonna deliver a solid, good looking photo with really fast autofocus. It just depends on which one suits your use case more. And speaking about autofocus, both cameras are extremely fast when it comes to their autofocus systems, especially with video. Generally, Sony is the leader in autofocus, but Canon has made a huge leap forward with its latest autofocus technology. And I don't see much of a difference when it comes to doing this headshot autofocus test. The PowerShot V1 does have an internal fan, which will greatly help for those longer shoots and prevent it from overheating. But because the ZV-1 is an 8-bit camera, I've never had any issues with it overheating on me, even though it's in such a small body. The PowerShot V1 is a lot bigger in form factor and it's heavier than the ZV-1. Both menus are nice, but I prefer Canon's menu system because I can always find what I'm looking for fairly easily. With Sony cameras, even after owning it for 5 years, I still have a little bit of trouble finding some of the things that I'm looking for. The better grip is gonna go to the PowerShot V1 all day long because the ZV-1's grip is almost non-existent. That's why I would highly recommend you pick up a cage for the ZV-1 if this is your choice, but I think I would pick up a cage for both cameras just to protect them from drops. Both cameras have a quarter mount thread on the bottom, which is great for attaching tripods or other accessories like a gimbal or a cage, but it's a big negative when you want to mount your camera up on a tripod or a gimbal, because in order to change the battery or the media, you're going to have to remove the cameras from the tripod or the gimbal, or remove your Arca Swiss mount plate just to replace the battery and the media. Both cameras have a good amount of customization that you can do with the buttons on the outside of the cameras, although the PowerShot V1 does have a mode dial on the top, which I really appreciate because it gives me a more tactile experience than the button that I use with the Sony ZV-1, which is just a push button. Also, the mode dial on the top of the PowerShot V1 has 3 custom modes, whereas if I want to customize different modes with the ZV-1, I'm gonna have to jump into the menu. Both cameras do have mic ports and a micro HDMI port and also a data transfer port. It's USB-C with the PowerShot V1, and it's a multi-transfer port on the ZV-1. But a big benefit to getting the PowerShot V1 is the fact that it also has a headphone port, so you can monitor your audio along with listening to playback in a very noisy environment. Both cameras do have fully articulating touchscreens, which is great for vlogging, and also when I have to put the cameras into hard to reach places to get tough angles. However, the touchscreen on the ZV-1 only controls the focus, whereas you can control different settings on the touchscreen with the PowerShot V1. The PowerShot V1 can shoot in 4K up to 60 frames per second, but that is with a crop, and it can also shoot in 4K 30 frames per second without a crop. But the ZV-1's highest frame rate it can shoot in 4K is 30 frames per second. However, it does have high frame rate mode, which means that you can shoot in 960 frames per second at 720p. This makes it a great feature for those of you who want to do super slow motion type of shots. Just make sure that your subject is lit properly. I learned this from experience. I think that Canon's playback interface is easier to not only navigate, but also to use, and I can scroll along the playback timeline, whereas the ZV-1, I can only control the playback from the buttons. Both cameras have the ability to remove the batteries. They're pretty small batteries, and both of them don't last the longest amount of time. The PowerShot V1 uses the LPE17 battery. It's the smallest of Canon's interchangeable lens camera batteries, and the Sony ZV-1 uses an MP-BX1 X series rechargeable battery. But like I mentioned, the ZV-1 burns through the batteries twice as fast as the Canon. I was able to get about an hour and a half to 2 hours shooting video sporadically with the PowerShot V1, where I was only able to get about an hour doing the same type of shooting with the ZV-1. If you're after cinematic quality, getting the best color grading flexibility, and also having pro level control, then the PowerShot V1 is the better choice. It's got that 10-bit Canon C-Log 3, it's oversampled 4K, it's built-in cooling fan, which is great for anybody who's looking to do more professional type of work. It's got a larger sensor, it's got a headphone jack, and customizable modes right here from the dial on the top, which makes it a solid tool for creators who want to take full control. But if you need something a little bit more fast and simple and portable, then the ZV-1 is gonna shine. It's perfect for vlogging, for POV shots, for those high frame rate shots where you wanna do super slow motion. It has very intuitive features like product showcase and also real-time autofocus, and it also has a defocus toggle as well. It delivers great looking colors straight out of the camera, and it makes it great for spontaneous, fast-paced shooting, especially when you want to just point and shoot. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know which one of these two cameras you like better and why. I'm Joe with the Film Alliance, and I'll see you on the next video.